this session in case people want to listen to this afterwards. So Cybersecurity Skills Journal has a variety of resources available to authors to assist you in your publishing. Anyone who registers with the Cybersecurity Skills Journal as a peer reviewer or submits a manuscript can become eligible for fellowships. As an open access journal, obviously there are costs associated with publication. And if you are familiar with open access journals, it is fairly common for the publication cost of that to be borne by authors. However, both with resources that we gain from having sponsors to the journal or grants received from federal agencies and others supporting the journal, as well as those who participate in working with us to bring the journal to publication, all of those are eligible to receive waivers of those publication fees, and we refer to that as a Cybersecurity Skills Journal Fellowship. The submission process for the journal is through an electronic submission system called EasyChair. Many of you may already be familiar with that. It's used extensively to support conferences and other publications. It facilitates the rapid review process so we can get back to you quickly with feedback and suggestions. Another very unique aspect of the Cybersecurity Skills Journal is it is designed to be very, very constructive and developmental in its reviews. We staff our review panels with up to 10 reviewers. The reason for the much larger than typical review panel is so that we can provide a copious amount of feedback and suggestions for improvements or enhancements to each and every manuscript, and to help that author move the idea from perhaps even fairly rough draft that might be submitted initially into the journal to a journal length and rigorously designed study for publication. So as I mentioned, the waivers for the open access fees will be a result of submitting material to the journal or becoming a peer reviewer or other things, but also National CyberWatch Center member institutions, their faculty and others involved with those institutions are also eligible for waivers of these open access fees. And finally, there's opportunities for honoraria associated with converting your publications into training programs, which we call cybersecurity skills development workshops. And as I mentioned, also receiving royalties potentially from executables that might be associated with the publication. So how do you become a fellow? First and foremost would be to register to become a peer reviewer or apply to become a member of the editorial board. The link shown on the screen there is how you might do that. It's of course a link to our website for a web page under the National CyberWatch Center for the journal. The fellowships are granted for 1 year automatically to anyone who registers as a peer reviewer, and that earns you 1 point towards a continuation of that fellowship in future year. There's a total of 12 points required in the second year after registering as a peer reviewer to maintain your fellowship, and points are awarded for the following activities. Becoming a member of the editorial board, you would be given 1 point per monthly meeting that you attend. If you become a section editor of the journal, there's 8 points associated with that. If you're an author of an accepted publication, there's 6 points associated with that. So on your second publication in the journal, you would be awarded a fellowship for the following year. The review panels themselves, again, they're large review panels, so we really want to encourage lots of folks to be part of the review system. If you lead a review panel, that's 6 points towards the fellowship. Again, leading 2 panels in the year would be all that would be required in order to maintain your fellowship. If you're collating materials and reports for a panel, that's 4 points, or 3 panels a year to maintain that fellowship. If you're a reviewer, it's 2 points. If you're an author of a manuscript that's accepted for review, even if it is never published, that author or authors, if it's joint authored, each receive 2 points for submission of each manuscript. And then finally, if you're a registered reviewer, as I mentioned before, you have 1 point towards fellowship just from registration. The editorial policy of the journal is really focused on recognizing leaders in evidence-based cybersecurity. And the key term there is really evidence-based. We're very interested in raising the capability maturity of the cybersecurity workforce. And to do so, we need to begin to understand what practices and what instructional techniques are being effective. There's very little, actually, evidence-based analyses of practices, techniques, tools, procedures, and instructional designs in the field of cybersecurity. And so we plan to be the go-to resource for that type of material. Associate editors are aligned with specific topics in the cybersecurity field, and we're looking for people who are thought leaders in the respective areas of cybersecurity, which I'll talk about more here in a minute. So that means if you have a prior publication record or have accomplishments in practice within cybersecurity, you can apply to become an associate editor of the journal. The CSJ reviewers also are eligible for awards associated with providing high quality and very constructive and insightful reviews. Again, our primary mission is to help potential authors bring their ideas to journal quality. And so a big part of that is the quality of the reviews that our reviewer panels will be producing. And consequently, we want to recognize those who especially provide very quality reviews. The research itself is available for impact awards and practice, either research impact awards or practice impact awards that will recognize respectively the contribution that the paper represents for the literature in cybersecurity. That would be a research impact reward. And if the executables that are associated with that particular publication are valuable to individuals in the field as recognized by their downloading of those materials, there would be practice impact awards. And finally, at the annual conference, 3CS, we will offer best paper awards that represent those papers that had notable rigor applied to their analysis of skilled practice development or implementation. What kind of papers are we interested in reporting? So the Cybersecurity Skills Journal, first of all, we will be moving towards a quarterly journal publication. The first year of a journal is always difficult because you have the chicken and the egg problem of you want to get the journal out there and getting the reputation for the type of manuscripts you're producing, but you need manuscripts to do that. So it's a bit of a process of building up a pipeline of manuscripts for the journal. So initially, we will probably publish maybe closer to once a year, as we've already done in 2018, but then eventually moving towards a quarterly peer-reviewed journal. We do use a blind peer review, double-blind peer review process for those of you who are faculty at educational institutions, and your tenure policies require that you publish in a double-blind peer-reviewed journal. I want to assure you that that is absolutely what CSJ is designed to do. More information about that is available on our author guidelines document, and that document again is available at the website that I showed previously, and I'll show again at the end of this brief presentation. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're really looking to advance the knowledge and practice in all areas of the cybersecurity profession, but focusing especially on evidence-based research of effective practices. And therefore, while we are interested in a broad range of topics, we have special interest in anything that is obviously empirically oriented or can drive empirical work, such as deep theoretical articles that are providing conceptual frameworks that enables empirical work to be done, or selective case studies that enable people to gain an understanding of how particular practices are being implemented that could then subsequently facilitate the empirical analysis of those practices. Our scope is international, but we obviously, being published here in the US, are very focused also on national priorities. We are interested both in the academic and practitioner audiences. And again, the title of the journal is a little unique. It's Cybersecurity Skills Journal, Practice and Research. Many of you may be familiar with journals that have those latter two words in their title. Most often, it is research and practice. But we wanted to emphasize that the Skills Journal is primarily interested in articles that will ultimately improve the practice of cybersecurity. And therefore, research that's published in the journal is intended to improve practices and not just contribute only to the research dialogue. The work can be focused at the individual practitioner level. It could be focused at a cybersecurity team working together, or it could be looking at more broader issues such as national frameworks for competency analysis, assessments, or other certification and credentialing related articles, etc. The skills areas that we're interested in, you can see listed here. Certainly that is just to give you a list of examples, not all inclusive by any means. And we'd encourage you to take a broad view of any potential interest area that you have and submitting articles to the journal. Finally, we're eventually hoping to develop a library of what are called systematic reviews. And this is typically a type of research that is not generally seen in the engineering and computing professions. It's more common in healthcare and business and in some other fields. But the idea is over time to assemble a large catalog of empirical work that allows us to gain deep insight into the effectiveness of specific practices, but more specifically, when those practices are best used. So developing, if you will, conditional expertise in the field by identifying the settings, the conditions that are required in order for a practice to be most effective. Now, the healthcare field has been doing this, for example, for a long time. They have actually two different cataloging agencies, the collaborative that's been put together by the Cochrane Foundation and the Campbell Foundation in England and US respectively. And our goal is to be something similar for the cybersecurity profession, where we will be assembling all of these varying reports and then allowing researchers to utilize those findings to develop systematic analyses, typically called meta-analyses, to determine the most accurate assessment of how effective various practices are under certain conditions, and producing what are called confidence intervals, if you're not familiar with the meta-analysis, that enables us to gain a great deal of clarity over just to what extent will a particular practice improve the results, or in our case, the security of the system. So that's the ultimate goal, and as I mentioned, we will seek to achieve that goal with three digital types of assets. First, obviously, articles that report the results of findings in these areas. Second, educational packages, whether that be an LMS package or a practice and challenge lab or assessments or other types of educational materials that could be replicated and disseminated throughout the field. And then finally, there may be practice guides, tutorials or tools that could assist the practitioner in implementing the techniques that were found to be most effective. Our entire journal publication is built around the principles of the National CyberSecurity Workforce Framework. All of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with this environment that identified 7 different specialty areas. The National CyberWatch Center for many years has been producing a variety of curriculum aligned with those, and that's what you see arrayed here around this diagram, from the foundation level of the IT capabilities and skills needed to produce these specialty areas. So networking, scripting, Linux, Windows Server fundamentals, etc. And then all of those fundamental IT capabilities being bridged into a information security fundamentals course that then enables individuals seeking careers in the field to begin to specialize in career pathways associated with forensics or penetration testing, ethical hacking, etc. we hope that we'll, over time, generate, again, a library of articles and experiences that cover each of these areas. I see that we've had a couple questions come up, so I want to address those as I go along. And please do type in the chat if you have any questions, comments you'd like to share with the group. First question I see here is that, is CSJ indexed in Scopus? We are submitting the CSJ material to electronic publishing organizations that will provide that material for indexing in a variety of sources, Google Scholar and others like Scopus. And so our intent is, again, to have that material easily available through a variety of indexing methods. Okay, how do we help you get your ideas into journal publications? So the first and most foremost way is to work directly with you from the idea conception phase all the way through that journal production process. And so coming up in just a couple weeks here, on May 8th, from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock Eastern Time, we'll be holding a virtual paper development workshop. Now, for those who may not be familiar with this idea, this is something done in a variety of fields, especially areas like cybersecurity, where the research element is fairly new and perhaps less robust than it is in a number of other, if you will, more mature fields. So the paper development workshop is really designed to help you move that idea, regardless of where it is, if it's just sort of a notion, to get some ideas on that notion. Is this something that can indeed be researched? All the way through having a rough manuscript, or perhaps a presentation or a paper that you submitted to a conference that you'd like to move towards journal publication. So anywhere along that continuum, I'd encourage you to come to the paper development workshop on May 8th. We are doing this in conjunction with our virtual brown bag lunch series that we hold each month, sponsored by the Cybersecurity Skills Journal and the Curriculum Standards Panel that the National CyberWatch Center runs. And the purpose of the PDW is really to allow you to get very hands-on advice, direct actionable feedback on how to move your idea or manuscript towards a journal publication. So the way the workshop will function is we will start off in a common Zoom room, just as we are today. We will have a very brief presentation, just kind of reviewing in a nutshell what I did right at the outset, just what is the focus of the journal, quickly go over the call for papers that is currently outstanding, and then break into virtual breakout rooms, which is a feature offered by the Zoom platform that allows you to have a small group discussion with some other authors, with members of our peer review panels, and with members of the editorial board of the Cybersecurity Skills Journal. So you'll have an opportunity to present your idea or the research that you've conducted, then receive developmental feedback from those in the virtual room to help you advance whatever aspect of cybersecurity skills that you're investigating, whether that be assessments or practice or instruction, and then have some feedback on what are the next steps. How do you then take your research to that next level towards publication? So really that's the focus of the workshop. It's longer than our usual virtual brown bag lunches, which typically run a little less than 45 minutes. We like to keep them fairly quick so they fit within the lunch hour. But this particular one, because it's going to be focused on much more directed feedback, giving an opportunity, sufficient opportunity for each author in the breakout rooms. There will typically be, maybe as much as 3 or 4 authors in a room with other with reviewers and board members. So we want to give each person an ample opportunity to explain their idea or to provide an overview of the research that they've conducted or the manuscript that they have written, and get very pointed and actionable reviews. So this particular virtual brown bag lunch is sort of double-sized. So it'll go from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock Eastern Time on May 8th. Okay, so how can you get involved in the Cybersecurity Skills Journal? So the call for papers is currently open and available. You can submit manuscripts to it or for it at that link there. It's we again use the Easy Chair system. And secondly, you can become a peer reviewer or serve on an editorial team or the peer review panels by going to the web page and clicking on the link down there, or directly entering this link into your browser, and that will take you directly to an event registration page that will allow you to sign up to become a peer reviewer for the journal. So that's pretty much what I had to report today. Let me give you an opportunity to ask any questions. And by default, everybody is muted, but there is a raise hand function that should be at the bottom there of your screen, where you can raise hand and I can unmute you if you'd like to speak a question. Or, of course, please feel free to add questions into the chat. How rough can rough be? Great question, Lauren. Thank you. Also, let me add, Lauren Buchanan, who just asked her question, is one of our esteemed members of our editorial review panel. And I would encourage you to not be concerned about a paper being too rough. Really, what we really want to encourage people to come forth with innovative ideas, new and exciting approaches to understanding skilled performance in cybersecurity. Again, the idea of first of all, a skills journal by itself is so new that there probably aren't a lot of well-developed manuscripts in this area. Secondly, cybersecurity itself, in terms of a research field, is very new. And consequently, it is not uncommon for very innovative thinking to not have been put into print, let alone into a manuscript. So we really want to encourage you to bring really any of your rough ideas and thoughts, and then work with some of our review panel members to help you determine how to move that more towards a publication. So follow-on question. So if I have an approach but don't yet have methods or metrics to prove it, is that okay? Yeah, I encourage you again to bring forth ideas for how you might take what you believe to be a very effective practice. Again, practice thought of broadly, both in terms of perhaps tactics or techniques or procedures being used in the field to affect cybersecurity, but also if you have an instructional design, an idea for a virtual lab, or a new way of instructing particular concepts in cybersecurity. Those rough ideas, just put in paper in the form of perhaps even nothing more than an abstract to get started, just to get an idea out there that you'd like to explore. Then the panels can kind of help you think, well, what might be the next steps? How might I turn that into a specific set of research questions? How might I find an audience to seek to gather data from? Either in partnership with other members of the Cybersecurity Skills Journal community, other fellows, or perhaps just getting some advice and counsel on how I might go about and doing that myself. Again, the idea really is to nurture new and innovative ideas on cybersecurity practice. So recognizing that this field is very new, recognizing the idea of even research for many practitioners in the field. We'd really like to encourage practitioners to bring their successful experiences and ideas and innovations they've created to the community so that they can be broadly distributed and disseminated, but also empirically analyzed to ensure that we are indeed using effective practices. I'm always hesitant to use the word best practice, because especially in a field that has very little empirical support for often what is done, to suggest anything is best would be really quite premature. But in fact, we oftentimes don't even know what are effective practices because of the real lack of empirical work showing that specific techniques and tactics and procedures, et cetera, are indeed effective. So I really would encourage you to bring anything that you have as an idea, and that will allow you to get some advice and counsel to see if it makes sense to move it toward a manuscript. Okay, is there desired page requirements length for articles that will be accepted? We do have some guidance in our author guidelines. We do intend to publish articles of a variety of length, some that might be more early thoughts that will be very short in length, others that might be more research notes where perhaps some preliminary work has been done, but yet not complete enough to form a full manuscript. And of course, we'll have the full journal length articles. I think a good example is the inaugural issue that was published in 2018. There's examples in there of how abstracts, collected abstracts from the 3CS conference were assembled and disseminated through the journal. I'm sure many of you go to conferences all the time. I know I do various cybersecurity conferences where if you're at the event and you're lucky enough to be in the session where some terrific innovative idea was discussed, you go away feeling, wow, this conference was fantastic. But what about all those people who didn't have that opportunity, weren't in that room? There, in many of the conferences in the cybersecurity profession, and I would argue to say maybe even most of the conferences don't produce proceedings. And therefore, if you're not present, you don't win. And so we want to help bring more of that great thinking to the community. And so that's one of the reasons we're going to be reaching out to do special issues with a variety of conferences. If you're aware of a conference that you think would benefit from having the presentations that are given there, given a wider audience through the journal, we'd love to hear about it. But the basic idea is we again don't want to constrain your thinking. If you have kind of an early thought, that could just be a little essay that gets produced in the journal. If you have, again, some preliminary research, it could be a research note. If you have a full-length article that's 20, 30, or 40 pages in length, all of that are acceptable possibilities. Next question is, are there opportunities to make dollars with the National CyberWatch, especially for those hands-on items? Absolutely. And so again, as I mentioned early in the presentation, the CyberWatch, the Cybersecurity Skills Journal is unique in that we are providing a way for authors to generate royalty and honoraria income from their intellectual property. And so in addition to obviously getting people aware of the value of these materials through empirical analyses and other publications, we also want to provide those authors an opportunity to disseminate executables, things that someone can actually put to use, hands-on, either in the form of instructional libraries or in the form of practice tools and guides, to be able to do so and earn royalty income from that. And so there will be, there's a free wall and a pay wall. The free wall is for access to the journal, all the journal content in the form of the publications and articles. And then there's a paywall side where executable materials, digital assets, if you will be made available for fee that can then be shared with the authors. Okay, next looks like a comment question, I guess. So CSJ is seeking submissions that will help the community develop the hypothesis for what works in cybersecurity education and in cybersecurity practice, and then postulate the methods to validate the hypotheses. And yes, that's absolutely true. The key here is that we have a lot of things being done in this community to try to address the growing threat, the constantly changing threat landscape, and yet little work yet being done in terms of determining when and where those practices, techniques, tools, etc., are most effective. And so we really want to encourage people to explore this. If you have just some thinking about, well, how might we go about that? What might be a method, effective method for identifying effective practices? That would be a terrific journal, CSJ journal article. If I have perhaps a theory of cybersecurity practice, how cybersecurity auditors might go about their work, or how, what are the potentially most important factors for an ethical hacker to be investigating in order to ensure the security of a system. All of these types of thinking tools as well as practice tools is really a core focus of the Cybersecurity Skills Journal. We encourage you to bring manuscripts to us that focus in those areas. Other questions, comments? Did you post deadlines, quarterly or rolling? We do have rolling deadlines. So basically, we try to get our feedback back to authors very quickly. So we will get you certainly an editorial decision very quickly in terms of placing your idea into a review panel. Again, really our criteria there is the mission and goals of the journal. That's why those author guidelines are, of course, freely available on the website. We encourage you to look at that just to make sure your idea and or manuscript fit that particular guidance. But other than that, assuming it fits within that, you will very quickly be assigned to a review team who will then provide some feedback very quickly. We are targeting to make sure we get feedback back to the authors within no later than 4 to 6 weeks. And that way you can start moving forward with your idea or manuscript to get it towards publication. So because of that, we'll be assembling obviously accepted and completed manuscripts and publishing them. And until we have a sufficient library, we don't want to commit to a publishing schedule, other than the fact that, as I mentioned, our target is to become a quarterly journal, but initially our most important target is to make sure we are producing quality, effective, insightful articles that will help advance cybersecurity practice. And therefore, we're more focused on making sure we have good work than rushing work to publication. Okay, can I talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the PD workshop? Absolutely. So let me roll back to that for a second, just as a reminder to everybody. So the paper development workshop is, again, a concept that's been used in other fields. And our strategy is to apply this in the cybersecurity domain, but also to hold these periodically, both in virtual and physical forms. So this first one is a virtual workshop. And we will be holding a physical workshop at the 3CS conference coming up at the beginning of August. And then eventually we'd like to host very similar functions at other well-attended conferences. For instance, we've proposed to the NICE working groups that we conduct one at the NICE workshop. And that was a proposal we made for the NICE conference. They haven't reviewed those yet, but we're obviously optimistic that they would want to include such a thing at the NICE conference coming up in November. So the paper development workshop, the way it proceeds is, like I said, we'll have a very, very brief, no more than 10-minute introduction to the journal overall and to the process to be conducted during the paper development workshop. Then we will quickly move authors into groups. That when you sign up for the paper development workshop, there will be a form that you will complete, and that form provides us some basic information about your idea or manuscript that it will help us in assigning you to an appropriate room for individuals you will be working with. That's not to say that it'll be a full birds of a feather. There may be some reasonable amount of diversity depending on the number of submissions we receive in terms of how closely aligned each of the presenters in a breakout room will be. It's also dependent somewhat on the Zoom limits for breakout rooms. But basically the idea is we'll assign you to a group as closely as possible aligned with your research topic. And then each individual submitter will have an opportunity to present their idea or manuscript to the group, and then begin to receive feedback initially from the editorial board member who will be supervising that group, or a peer review lead who would be supervising that particular breakout group, and then other reviewers that are in our group. We have over 100, around 117, I think at last count, peer reviewers. So we've got a good stable, so to speak, of reviewers that can help participate in this program. And the idea will be that they would provide some feedback first, but then we'd also open it up to other authors to contribute their thoughts. And then we stop that one and then move on to the next one. So basically, it will be a round robin kind of presentation. At the end of all those presentations, we will come back for a very brief, again, probably no more than 10, maybe 15-minute report out from each of the groups, just to understand what people have derived in terms of benefits or lessons learned or insights or questions that people still have regarding moving their idea or manuscript towards publication. So that's basically the process. So as a prospective author, do I need slides to present, or do I just read my abstract? That's kind of up to you. Everybody has a different style. The Zoom environment, one of the reasons we really like using it is that it does allow for multiple and really easily supports multiple presenters. Literally, it can be set up so multiple people can present at the same time, although the reality is they shift from person to person. But that does allow for an easy presentation of your material. We would ask that you try to keep whatever mode you choose to present, whether that be slides or just a summary of your abstract or your paper, to probably less than 2-3 minutes in order to provide the focus of the time on providing you feedback, which is really where the value is going to be derived. So you want to give enough information that your audience, if you will, the board members and reviewers and your other fellow authors can get a good understanding of what you're researching or what you've evaluated, but not so much that you reduce the amount of time that's available for you to receive feedback, because that should be the goal for you, and it certainly is our goal to provide to you. Okay, other questions, comments? As a prospective author, can I ask for specific feedback on areas I'm having problems with, or is it a round robin kind of feedback? Another excellent question. So in the registration form for this event, there are 5 pieces of, well, besides your name and things like that, there are 5 kind of substantive pieces of information that we're going to ask for from you. First is a very brief topic description, 255 characters or less, kind of like a tweet. The second would be a problem statement. So what is the problem you believe your investigation is trying to address? Third is just a selection of what stage of manuscript development are you in. So is your manuscript at the purely conceptual stage? Have you advanced it to, say, an abstract or a limited draft, first draft, that type of thing? Third, or fourth, I should say, and directly to the question that was asked, we asked that you give a brief description of the type of feedback you're requesting. What specifically would you believe that you will benefit from in terms of advancing your idea towards a journal publication? That way, all of this information, of course, will be shared with the review panel that will be in your breakout room, so that they're prepared to provide you with appropriate feedback for what you're seeking to improve the status of your manuscripts. And then finally, if you do have files that you've developed, whether it be, again, a presentation that you delivered at a conference, a paper manuscript that is partially drafted, or simply an abstract, that you have a place where you can make attachments to the registration form, and that information, again, will be disseminated to those that will be with you there in the breakout room. Okay, other questions? Well, not seeing any. If anyone does have any further questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. Again, we have recorded this session, and therefore there'll be an opportunity once it's posted to the website for comments and feedback at that location. And I hope this has been very helpful to you in terms of at least understanding what the mission, goals, and kind of focus is for the Cybersecurity Skills Journal, how the journal might help you in moving your ideas and experiences and practices towards publication so that many, many others can benefit from the experience that you've had. Again, thank you for attending today, and we look forward to having you attend hopefully the Paper Development Workshop as well as future webcast events from the National CyberWatch Center. Have a wonderful afternoon.